Great. So our initial functionality works. We have API key. We add it to our URL. Of course, we constructed with the root endpoint as well as the photos. And as a result, we get back 10 images. The problem right now is that we're sharing our access key with the rest of the world. So eventually, when you push your project up to GitHub, anyone who visits the repo can just grab the key and he or she can do whatever they please with the key. And that is not the best practice. It is much better to set up environment variables and then add that env file to the gitignore. So when we push this up to the GitHub, well, we can only see the name of the value. Okay, so we don't see the actual key. And this is exactly what we're going to do in this video. Now, environment variables, or env variables, how they are also called, are not specific to React or create React app. So the boilerplate that we're using to set up our apps. But there are some gotchas when it comes to using and setting up environment variables in Create React app environment. And originally, the environment variables are coming from the node. Now, if you want to get more info, just navigate to your favorite search engine, and then you can type CRA and then environment variables. And you should see some of the links, and the first one probably will lead back to the docs. And then notice here you can keep on scrolling and you'll get more info. And I'll reference here and there this documents page as well. And we start by creating .env file. However, the location is extremely important. So you don't put the .env in the source. You have to put it in the root. Now, when I talk about root, I'm not talking about our whole project. I'm talking about the setup folder. Or, for example, if you're working in a final folder. Or if you would be working, I don't know, in a different project, again, we have final and the setup. So keep in mind that whenever you have a project, just place it in the root. And I guess the easiest way to remember is just place it side by side with gitignore or package.json. So in here, I'll say new file, and then the name is also important. So we go with dot and then env. So that just means that you won't be able to see it in traditional desktop. So essentially, if you take a look at the folder using the Finder, you won't be able to see it. That's all. So we go with a .env, and then we're setting up key value pairs. So we have name of the variable and then the value. Now, in Create React App, all your names must start with uppercase React_app. Now, after that, the name is up to you. You can call it bananas, but the prefix is important. Otherwise, Create React App is not going to be able to find. So just grab this prefix, or you can type it out, copy and paste, and then come up with your name. So in my case, I'm going to go with access and then _key. And then, of course, we would need to provide the value. Now, the key here is that we don't need to go with quotation marks or anything like that. We just grab our value, whatever it is, our access key, and copy and paste. And then once we have this one in place, of course, we would want to access it. So we would navigate to app.js. And then notice here, I already set up the variable, but I'm going to do it one more time together just so we all are on the same page. So we go here with const and then some kind of name. So in my case, I'm going to go with client and then uppercase ID. And then I would want to construct it. I would want to construct my template string. So again, the same thing. We go with question mark. And then the URL, of course, stays exactly the same. So we go with client_ID. And then instead of copying, pasting the value like we did previously, now, of course, I would want to access that env variable. And the way we access it, we go with process.env. And then whatever is the name. So we go here with process.env, and then whatever is the name. So in my case, of course, it was React_app, and then the access key, access and then key. Now, if you want to maybe avoid some unnecessary bugs, you can just copy and paste, which is exactly what I'm going to do because typing is not my best friend. So I'll save it over here. And now, of course, where we have the client ID, now I'll pass in my variable. Now, one thing that I would like to mention though is that whenever you set up this .env, so the file for the environment variables, you must restart the server. So the dev server. And the way we do that, of course, is by going to the terminal and then stopping the server with Control C, and then we go with npm and then start. And of course, where I have right now the API key, I will remove this sucker here. And I'm just going to say that I would like to access the variable by the name of client ID. By the way, I messed it up over here. It should be client, not with a D. So I'm going to go with client ID. And then where I have the main URL, of course, now I'm going to access my client ID. And if everything is correct, we should still get back those 10 images. So let me refresh. And there it is. Now everything works. And if you check it out, of course, now when I'll push this up to the GitHub, no one will be able to see my key. They'll just see process.env and then React app and then whatever is the name. And of course, that is a better practice because then people cannot take your key and use it however they would like. Now, one last thing that I would like to mention is that when you set up .env file, also make sure that in the gitignore, you have this included. So essentially, gitignore is a file that just specifies which files will be ignored by the source control. And since you wouldn't want to push this .env to the GitHub, that's why you would want to also include this file. Because otherwise, if you set up .env file, and then if you pass in the value, and you set up everything correctly in your code, if you won't add that file to gitignore, well then it's pretty much useless. Because the person who is looking for the access key can simply go to .env and check out the value. So the whole idea is to create this file and then right away add it to the gitignore, which by the way, I already did. I'm just telling you for your own project. And then of course, you would want to restart the server so you don't get some silly bugs. And then eventually, whenever you want to use it, you just go with process.env and then whatever is the name. And of course, you can add as many values as you'd want over here. Just remember that you don't need to have quotation marks or nothing like that. And one last thing that I would want to mention, if you take a look at the final one, so the final folder in stock photos, you won't be able to run the project if you don't have the .env. So if you want to compare your code, of course, you can go to the final folder. But if you want to run the final folder, then before you do anything, you need to create the .env file, then set up your value. So you need to check, first of all, what is the name for my variable? And of course, you can see that in the app.js and notice how the name is exactly the same. So I went with React underscore, then app underscore access underscore key. That is the name that you must have in the .env file in the final folder again. And then you need to pass in your value for the key. So I already set up the .env, but you won't be able to see that because, of course, I did include in the gitignore. That's why, yeah, on my machine, of course, you can see it, but on your, you won't. So create the React access key. That's the variable, and then pass in your value. And then, of course, you go with traditional npm install and then npm start. Otherwise, if you just try to run the project, the dev server will complain that, hey, listen, I cannot find this specific key. So that's the difference between different projects where, of course, previously you were able to run any of the projects by just installing dependencies. In this case, since we're using the API key in our project, of course, it's a bit different. Again, the whole setup is so we're not sharing this key with the rest of the world. When we push our project up to the GitHub.